This is one of the most unique towns in the Western Hemisphere. Not only is this place full of color, beautiful architecture, and delicious food like a lot of towns in Mexico, but this town also happens to be the site of one of the most impressive archaeological sites in the world, containing one of the largest pyramids globally. We discovered these ruins in the last episode, so now we're going to focus on the town and the many cool things it has to offer. So join me as we discover the Pueblo Magico of San Juan Teotihuacan. We start off where we left off in the last episode, which is where we were discovering these very impressive ruins. So the last episode is an episode you should definitely check out if you haven't already. We were even blessed to witness demonstrations with cultural instruments. And from these ruins, we start walking the short walk into town. Located roughly 25 miles from CDMX, Teotihuacan is essentially in the northern edges of the vast metropolitan area of Mexico City. As I mentioned in the previous episode, the cactus has a big part in this culture because supposedly Mexico has the highest diversity of cacti in the world. You typically find varieties of this plant in the northern deserts of this country as well as the southern highlands. And by the way, this street that connects the pyramids to the town is called Pirámides. What do you know? As to be expected, we start seeing art celebrating the native culture as we start entering the town. We also happen to pass by what seems to be a storefront and or a distribution center for a very famous Mexican brewing company, and that is Modelo, which exports beer nationally and internationally. At this point, I was quite hungry and thirsty after such a long day of discovery. And lucky for me, I ran into a coffee shop that served what seemed to be very natural cheeses and deli meats. I really enjoy new experiences, so I decided to check this place out. And to say this place was cute and cozy is an understatement. And of course, I started off with a matcha latte and some honey, as well as a large board of meats and cheeses. After all, the culinary scene in Mexico does not end with tacos. Not only was the presentation amazing, but I have to say that the food tasted quite natural. After this very satisfying meal, it was now time to move on and explore the town. Teotihuacan is considered a Pueblo Magico, or magical town in English. Pueblo Magicos are towns in Mexico that have big cultural significance. And being that we have such a massive ancient city next door, this is definitely validated. Just like other colonial and cultural cities in this country, you find many shops nestled in these old buildings. From my many visits in Mexico, every town typically has its mercado, which is basically its old school market where you find products and especially food at a generally affordable price. In Pueblo Magicos, you tend to see a lot of artwork adorning buildings, like what you see here on this pharmacy.
And here we're in the central plaza of the town of Teotihuacan, which is right next to the archaeological site. And you can see a lot of birds that are actually, looks like they are migrating. You see that all over Mexico. Even in Monterrey, you see parrots that come from the south, and also birds that come from the north.
The central plazas of Pueblo Magicos typically have a touristic sign advertising the town as you're about to see. The concept of Pueblo Magicos was put into motion by the Mexican government not too long ago to bring attention and tourism to beautiful towns that were going unnoticed. And the number of these towns has increased overall to roughly over 100. And being that this Pueblo Magico is famous for its pre-Hispanic history, we happened to find a fountain recently completed in 2016 in the center of town, celebrating the pre-Hispanic native dancer. And I even run into Casa de Cultura, which is basically the cultural center of the town, where I am witness to what seems to be one of the most iconic indoor murals in this city. And being that these small towns are known for having amazing street food, I decided to have some churros before leaving town. And then it was time to catch the bus back to Mexico City, or CDMX as they call it. And as I take the bus into town at nighttime, I am witness to one of the many skylines in the city, this being the long and developing financial district along Paseo Reforma, which is essentially the Champs-Élysées of Mexico, containing one of the most beautiful monuments in the country as its centerpiece, the Angel of Independence. This monument was built in the early 1900s during the presidency of Porfirio Diaz to commemorate the centennial of the beginning of the War of Independence for this country. Once I got back into town, I decided to finish off the night with a quick stroll along this majestic boulevard, which is amazing at this hour because you really feel like you have the city of 20 plus million to yourself. Looking down one of the busiest streets in the world and seeing it so quiet and empty is quite fascinating and a little eerie, to be honest with you. And also for a moment, I felt like I was on the modern day version of Teotihuacan's Avenue of the Dead. After this up and close moment with the angel, I decided to walk the boulevard a little bit to see the many art displays, which is quite common since Mexico City is known to be a very artistic city. And of course, walking around in a massive city like this, you find many random things, like what seems to be a self-sustaining community underneath a bridge. Or what seems to be a very euphoric individual randomly performing in the streets. Or even the typical not-so-healthy late-night food that you find in big cities that I tried to make healthier by taking out the bread. Stay tuned for the next very interesting episode as we discover where it all started for Mexico City at its historic core. This is a place that almost looks like a piece of old Europe with so much beautiful architecture as well as so much life and energy. Not to mention a lot of art and even world-class museums. Might I add, an abundance of cute coffee shops and restaurants. And of course, the usual delicious street foods. Believe it or not, one of the largest Chinatowns in Latin America can be found here in the core of Mexico City. And if a public cleansing is what you're looking for, you just might be able to find that in the heart of CDMX.